The Atlantic Ocean, vast, cold, and merciless. Between 1939 and 1945, it became the most dangerous shipping lane on Earth. Beneath the rolling waves, German U-boats prowled the depths, hunting the lifelines that kept Britain alive. Every convoy that sailed from North America carried not only food, fuel, and arms, but the fragile hope of survival for a nation under siege. Yet some convoys, even in victory, vanished into the fog of war, leaving behind questions that remain unanswered to this day. In March 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic reached a critical point. The Kriegsmarine's U-boat command, led by Admiral Karl Dönitz, had refined its deadly wolfpack tactics. Allied convoys, guarded by destroyers and corvettes, were crossing icy waters under constant threat. Among them was Convoy HX-112, departing Halifax, Nova Scotia, bound for Liverpool. 41 merchant ships formed a long, disciplined column, escorted by the Royal Navy's 5th Escort Group, including destroyers, HMS Walker, HMS Savannah, HMS Volunteer, and HMS Scimitar. HX-112 was under the protection of Commander Donald McIntyre, one of Britain's most skilled anti-submarine tacticians. His crews were veterans of earlier convoy battles, confident but weary. On the night of March 15, 1941, radar picked up faint echoes east of Iceland. The escorts prepared for contact. Beneath the surface, two of Germany's most famous U-boat aces, U-99 under Otto Kretschmer and 100 under Joachim Schepke, waited in silence. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic duels in the Atlantic. Shortly after midnight, U-100 made the first move. Torpedoes streaked through the water, striking two merchantmen, Sumbola and Erodona. Flames erupted across the convoy line. The escorts responded instantly, flares and depth charges lighting up the dark ocean. Within hours, both U-boats were engaged in a deadly chase. McIntyre's HMS Walker detected U-99 on Aztec sonar and dropped a precise barrage. When U-99 surfaced, Kretschmer ordered his men to abandon ship. He was captured. Germany's top U-boat ace, now a prisoner of war. Moments later, HMS Vanek rammed and destroyed U-100 as it tried to slip through the convoy. The Royal Navy had won a decisive victory, or so it seemed. When dawn broke and the last echoes of combat faded, the convoy reformed and counted its losses. Yet the numbers didn't add up. Several merchant ships, including the San Casimiro and Havtor, were missing. They hadn't been seen since the first attack, and no distress calls were logged. Search aircraft found no debris, no oil slicks, no survivors. The sea had swallowed them whole. At first, the Admiralty attributed the losses to the chaos of battle. Perhaps they'd been torpedoed by another U-boat before HX-112 reached safety. But post-war records revealed no such attack. Dönitz's logs, captured after Germany's surrender, showed only two submarines, U-99 and U-100, operating in that sector. Neither had claimed those ships. They had simply vanished. Historians later noted the unusual conditions that night. A fierce Arctic squall passed through the area, disrupting radio signals and confusing navigation. Some speculated the missing freighters strayed from formation and struck drifting mines. Others suggested a classified Allied experiment. Early radar or magnetic mine detection tests might have gone wrong, but no official inquiry was ever made public. A surviving diary entry from Lieutenant Harold Jennings of HMS Walker gives a haunting glimpse into that night. The sea was alive with fire and sound, but then silence. In the morning, it was as if parts of the convoy had never existed at all. For decades, wreck hunters have searched the stretch of ocean southeast of Iceland, known to sailors as U-Boat Alley. Sonar sweeps have revealed scattered hulls, but none confirmed as the missing ships from HX-112. The logbooks of Walker and Vanek remain intact, meticulously recorded, but they offer no answers, only questions. In the grand scope of the Atlantic War, HX-112 is remembered for the destruction of Germany's top U-boat commanders. Yet beneath that triumph lies an unsettling footnote, a handful of merchantmen that disappeared without trace, never acknowledged by any side. Their crews, British, Canadian, and Norwegian, listed as lost at sea. The official record concludes, presumed sunk, cause unknown. But for naval historians, the mystery remains. How could ships vanish in a convoy under such tight escort and observation? Was it a navigational accident, a wartime cover-up, or something more complex? a secret incident buried beneath layers of classified wartime communication. The Atlantic, after all, has never been a forgiving witness. Its depths hold countless untold stories, some lost to time, others waiting to be discovered. Czechs 112's triumph was written in the annals of victory, but its shadowed losses set the tone for the tragedies yet to come. And just months later, another convoy, sailing through those same northern waters, would meet a fate even more mysterious. September 1941, the North Atlantic grows colder and more hostile by the day. The Allied supply lines are stretched thin, their ships struggling through grey seas whipped by autumn storms. The Germans call it the happy time, when U-boats strike at will, and Allied convoys vanish beneath the waves faster than replacements can be built. Yet amid this chaos, one particular convoy, SC-42, would leave behind a trail of confusion, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Convoy SC-42 departed Sydney, Nova Scotia on August 30th, 1941. Bound for Liverpool, it carried 65 merchant ships, escorted by a modest force under Commodore H.P. Hudson. The primary escorts were aging Canadian corvettes and destroyers, HMCS Skeena, HMCS Aurelia, HMCS Alberni, and HMCS Chambly. The convoy's pace was painfully slow, averaging barely 8 knots, making it an easy target for Dönitz's growing Wolfpack fleet lurking between Greenland and Iceland. By early September, as the convoy entered the Greenland Gap, a deadly zone beyond air cover, 20 U-boats lay in wait. The Wolfpack, codenamed Markgraf, would strike SC-42 with coordinated fury. For 3 nights, torpedoes rained through the darkness. The Baron Pentland, Munich, and Stonepool went down in flames. Sailors clung to wreckage as the bitter cold claimed them before rescue could arrive. Yet in the chaos, 2 ships stood out, not for being hit, but for simply disappearing. The Empire Hudson, a 6,000-ton British freighter carrying grain, and the Silver Cedar, a Canadian merchantman loaded with aircraft parts, both vanished without a distress call. They were last seen near 61 from north, 34 from west, sailing in line formation. When dawn broke, their positions were empty, no debris in sight. What happened that night has remained one of the Atlantic's most perplexing wartime enigmas. Reports from HMCS Skeena's sonar crew noted brief, faint echoes. Something large, then nothing. The crew believed they were detecting submarines maneuvering below the convoy. Yet none of the U-boats in the area claimed those kills in post-war records. German logs later recovered from U-82s and U-432 make no mention of Empire Hudson or Silver Cedar. It was as if the sea had erased them from existence. Adding to the mystery were fragmented SOS signals, intercepted by British coastal stations on September 10th for Sakshul. The signals were weak, garbled, likely bounced by the ionosphere, and repeated a chilling phrase: engine room flooded, position uncertain, abandoning ship. The origin could not be triangulated, but naval cryptographers linked the call signs to Empire Hudson. No follow-up transmission was ever received. In the convoy's after-action report, Commodore Hudson wrote, 2 ships unaccounted for, presumed lost to night attack or collision during blackout. No survivors or wreckage found. However, years later, declassified British intelligence suggested an alternate possibility. A top-secret document from the Admiralty file ADM 22341 references possible misidentification of neutral, traffic, and the loss of 2 merchant vessels under unusual electromagnetic interference. Some historians interpret this as evidence of early radar or sonar testing gone wrong, experiments involving new frequency bands that might have interfered with navigation systems. The timing and position match the last known location of the missing ships. Others point to environmental causes. That same week, a violent undersea landslide occurred off Greenland's continental shelf, a rare geological event that triggered rogue waves and disrupted ocean currents. Could a natural phenomenon have destroyed 2 ships so swiftly and cleanly? Oceanographers remain divided. In 1998, a Norwegian research expedition aboard the RV Geosars conducted sonar mapping of the area once patrolled by SC-42. Among the deep ridges, they found a faint anomaly, 2 large metallic shapes resting more than 3,000 meters below the surface. No conclusive identification was made, but one appeared to match the hull dimensions of the Empire Hudson. Still, the data remains classified under maritime heritage protection laws, and no physical expedition has followed. For the men who survived SC-42, the loss was deeply personal. Petty Officer James McNeil of HMCS Aurelia recalled decades later, "You'd look over your shoulder and see the lights of another ship in line. Next morning, gone. Not even a slick on the water. You start to wonder if the sea keeps secrets on purpose." The disappearance of Empire Hudson and Silver Cedar didn't change the course of the war, but it left a mark on the Royal Navy's psyche. Convoy commanders became obsessed with tighter formations, redundant navigation, and improved communication. Yet even with all precautions, convoys continued to lose ships without explanation in that same region. A stretch of ocean sailors would come to call the Black Triangle. As the war dragged on into 1942, the Allies fought to regain control of the Atlantic. New escort carriers, radar, and breaking the Enigma code began to turn the tide. But even with the advantage of technology and intelligence, the ocean refused to yield all its secrets. The tragedy of SC-42 closed with a haunting statistic: 16 ships lost, 237 men dead, and 2 vessels that no enemy could claim. Their names live on only in convoy rosters and fading signals recorded on brittle naval paper reels. And yet, the mystery deepened with the next great disaster. A convoy scattered not by enemy attack, but by orders from its own high command. A disaster that would become one of the most infamous in Arctic history. PQ-17. June 1942. The Arctic Ocean lay in near-constant twilight. Ice floes drifted like ghosts through fog and sleet. It was a place where compasses faltered, engines froze, and survival itself was an act of defiance. Yet through this hostile realm, the Allies sent convoys carrying weapons, fuel, and aircraft to their Soviet allies. These Arctic convoys were among the most perilous missions of the war. None, however, would match the tragedy and mystery of many Convoy PQ-17. PQ-17 set sail from Hvalfjörður, Iceland, on June 27, 1942. It consisted of 35 merchant ships, manned by British, American, and Soviet crews, escorted by powerful Royal Navy units, 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, and anti-aircraft ships under the command of Commodore John Dowding. Covering them at a distance was a formidable force. The heavy cruisers HMS London and HMS Norfolk, and the American USS Wichita, part of Admiral Hamilton's close covering group. Their mission was vital: deliver 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, and thousands of tons of munitions to Murmansk and Archangel. But lurking in the Norwegian fjords was the spectre of the German battleship Tirpitz, the most powerful surface warship in Europe. Intelligence reports warned it might sortie to intercept the convoy, and fear of that single ship would lead to one of the most catastrophic decisions of the entire Atlantic War. For the first week, the voyage was uneventful, though tense. German reconnaissance planes shadowed the formation, and U-boats harassed its flanks. On July 4th, everything changed. The Admiralty in London, interpreting ultra-decrypts suggesting Tirpitz was moving north, issued a fateful order: "Convoy is to scatter." That single message sealed PQ-17's fate. Obeying orders, Commodore Dowding ordered all merchant ships to break formation and proceed independently towards Soviet ports. The escorts, meanwhile, were recalled westward to intercept Tirpitz, leaving the scattered ships alone in enemy waters. What followed was annihilation. Over the next 6 days, German aircraft and U-boats hunted down the defenseless merchantmen one by one. Dive bombers from Luftflotte 5 tore through the ice-streaked skies, their bombs striking with lethal precision. U-456, U-355, and U-703 claimed multiple kills. Only 11 of the 35 ships would reach safety. It was one of the greatest Allied maritime losses of the war. Yet amid the devastation, some disappearances defied even the brutal logic of war. At least 3 ships, William Hooper, Paulus Potter, and Honomu, were reported missing before the order to scatter was even given. Their last radio transmissions came on July 3rd during clear weather, when the convoy was still intact and under escort. No distress signals, no enemy sightings, no explosions. They were simply gone. Survivors from the destroyer, HMS Keppel, later recalled tracking unidentified radar shadows near the convoy that night. Large, stationary blips that vanished as quickly as they appeared. At the time, the British had only rudimentary radar, and interference was common in Arctic latitudes. But some officers speculated they had picked up echoes from icebergs or even surface disturbances caused by submarines beneath the convoy. One curious entry from the ship's log reads, 02:40 hours, contact bearing 140, stationary, lost at 02:43, no visual sighting. No debris. Post-war analysis by naval historians revealed no U-boat attacks corresponding to that time or position. The Kriegsmarine records showed that German submarines were still maneuvering hundreds of miles away. Even Luftwaffe reconnaissance reports contained no mention of those missing ships. It was as if they had vanished before the battle even began. In 1972, Soviet divers operating near Novaya Zemlya claimed to have found a wreck believed to be the Paulus Potter. The ship was upright, its deck cargo undisturbed, as though it had sunk vertically without explosion. No torpedo holes were visible, but large structural damage near the keel suggested a sudden massive hull failure, possibly caused by trapped ice or an internal detonation. The discovery was never officially verified, and the coordinates remain classified. Still, the psychological impact of PQ-17 was devastating. Churchill called it one of the most melancholy episodes of the war. Commodore Dowding, burdened with guilt, later wrote, "We were left to the wolves, and some of our ships were taken not by the enemy, but by fate itself." Modern analysts have suggested more technical explanations: mechanical failure, ice collisions, even cargo explosions caused by improperly stored munitions. Yet the timing and absence of any recorded enemy attack continue to trouble researchers. One Admiralty memo from 1945 quietly notes, certain losses within PQ-17 cannot be conclusively attributed to hostile action. What is certain is that the decision to scatter transformed an organized convoy into a massacre. The Arctic route, though strategically essential, had proven nightmarishly unpredictable, not only due to the enemy, but due to the ocean itself. The survivors who reached Murmansk described seas boiling with fire and skies blackened by smoke and snow. For those who perished, there were no graves, only ice and silence. The mystery of PQ-17 remains a symbol of both human error and nature's unforgiving power, a tragedy of men lost between conflicting orders and the frozen unknown. Yet even after this calamity, the Atlantic convoys would face another, subtler terror. Ships that vanished not in chaos, but in eerie calm, under full escort and fair skies. That was Convoy ONS 5Y. 1943, the turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic, and the next chapter in the ocean's unending enigma. May 1943, the midpoint of the Battle of the Atlantic. The tide was beginning to turn in favor of the Allies. New radar systems, air cover, and code-breaking breakthroughs had begun to cripple the once dominant German U-boat fleet. Yet the victory was not yet secure. And in that critical month, the Atlantic saw one of its most decisive and strangest engagements. Convoy ONS 5. Convoy ONS 5 sailed from Liverpool on Hasinin, April 21st, 1943. Bound for Halifax, Nova Scotia. It consisted of 42 merchant ships, escorted by Sonsor Escort Group B7, under the command of Captain Peter Gretton of the Royal Navy. His group included destroyers, HMS Duncan and HMS Vedette, frigates and corvettes such as Sunflower, Loosestrife and Pink. The convoy's course would take it through the mid-Atlantic Gap, a stretch of ocean still beyond the reach of Allied aircraft. It was here, in those deep, cold waters, that the battle for control of the Atlantic would reach its bloody climax. The weather was atrocious. Heavy gales battered the convoy for days, scattering ships and throwing navigation into chaos. Visibility fell to almost nothing. Ice built up on decks and antenna. In this confusion, the convoy's discipline began to fray. By April 29th, the German wolf packs, Fink, Specht, and Amsel, had closed in, converging on ONS 5 with over 40 U-boats, the largest concentration yet seen. For 5 nights, the convoy fought for its life. The battle that followed became a turning point. The escorts, using improved radar and new HFDF, high-frequency direction-finding equipment turned the tables on the hunters. Over the course of the engagement, 6 U-boats were sunk and others damaged, a catastrophic loss for Dönitz's fleet. It was a sign that the era of U-boat dominance was ending. Yet amid this celebrated victory, the Admiralty's after-action report contained a disturbing anomaly. 3 merchant vessels, Harperley, North Britain, and Gustav E. Reuter, disappeared during the night of May 4th, when weather conditions had briefly calmed. According to Convoy records, they were all last sighted intact at 22 hours, steaming in perfect formation under escort. By morning, they were gone. No distress flares, no torpedo strikes, and no wreckage were observed. In the logs of HMS Duncan, Gretton wrote laconically, 3 vessels unaccounted for at dawn. Area searched. No survivors. No oil slick. Cause uncertain. German records offer no explanation either. No U-boat operating in that sector claimed a kill matching those ships' tonnage or position. In fact, U-264 and U-210 both recorded evading depth charges that night but made no attack. Post-war cross-referencing of logs confirmed that the nearest German submarines were at least 60 miles from the convoy's position. So where had those 3 ships gone? Some survivors later spoke of eerie circumstances. Seaman Alan Devereaux of HMS Pink recalled in a 1970 interview, "The sea went flat as glass for an hour or two, dead calm. Then a fog rolled in, thicker than anything I'd ever seen. When it lifted, those 3 ships were gone. Not sunk, just gone." Hydrographic studies later revealed that the convoy had passed directly over one of the deepest parts of the North Atlantic Ridge, where the seafloor plunges nearly 5 kilometers. Could a sudden thermocline, a rapid shift in water density and temperature, have affected sonar readings and masked the real cause? Possibly, but it would not explain the complete absence of wreckage or oil. A more unsettling theory arose years later from declassified documents. Files from Admiralty Technical Branch 1943 mention field evaluation of magnetic anomaly detection arrays, MAD, in cooperation with US Naval Research. ONS-5, it seems, had been chosen as a test case for new anti-submarine sensors. Some naval historians believe that secret testing of high-output electromagnetic gear might have interfered with compasses and radios aboard nearby ships. If true, it could mean the missing vessels drifted out of formation, lost bearings, and sailed into the storm unreported. None were ever found, yet others believe a simpler, darker possibility. The chaos of battle led to accidental friendly fire. Several escorts that night launched depth charges, without confirmed sonar contact. A detonation beneath a nearby merchantman could have caused catastrophic structural failure without surface evidence. But no captain ever admitted to such an error, and none were recorded in the official logs. For Captain Gretton, the victory at ONS-5 was bittersweet. In his post-war memoir, Convoy Escort Commander, he reflected, "We had beaten the wolf packs, but the sea was still master. We were learning at last to fight the enemy, but not yet to understand the ocean." Decades later, sonar surveys by oceanographers detected a scattering of unidentified hulls along ONS-5's route, lying more than 2 miles beneath the surface. The Atlantic currents are fierce there, and identification has proven nearly impossible. To this day, no definitive evidence links any of those wrecks to the 3 missing ships. The Battle of ONS-5 marked the beginning of the end for the U-boat menace, a strategic turning point that gave the Allies control of the Atlantic lanes. But even amid triumph, the unexplained losses of that night remained a quiet reminder that the ocean's mysteries do not respect human wars or victories. And as the war neared its final years, whispers spread through the convoys of stranger tales still, of ships that never arrived, convoys logged as departed but never sighted again. By 1945, those whispers had a name among sailors: the ghost convoys. The final chapter of the Atlantic War would not be written in victory or defeat, but in the chilling silence of those who never returned. Spring 1945. The end of the war in Europe was in sight. Hitler's Reich was collapsing, U-boats were being hunted relentlessly, and Allied control of the Atlantic seemed complete. Yet, even as victory approached, the ocean remained unpredictable, and, in some cases, inexplicably cruel. One final mystery of the Atlantic War was about to unfold: the legend of the so-called ghost convoys, and among them, the most perplexing of all, Convoy HX358. Convoy HX358 was a routine eastbound crossing from Halifax to Liverpool, departing on March 20, 1945. It carried 65 ships, loaded with munitions, oil, and vehicles for the final Allied push into Germany. Its escort group, B3 Group, under Captain E.H. Baker Creswell, included destroyers, HMS Havelock, HMS Hesperus, and several frigates. The U-boat threat was thought to be minimal by then. Ultra-decrypts had given the Allies near-total awareness of German submarine positions. Most U-boats were retreating to bases in Norway or scuttling under orders. In theory, HX358's journey should have been safe, but somewhere between Newfoundland and Ireland, 3 days into its voyage, something went terribly wrong. March 23rd, a violent storm swept across the North Atlantic, scattering the convoy into smaller groups. Radio communications were intermittent, radar unreliable. By the time the storm subsided 2 days later, HX358's formation was fragmented. Baker Creswell's flagship, HMS Havelock, reassembled the majority of the ships, except for 4 that had vanished entirely. Fort York, Empire Hale, Belknap Victory, and Hopperstad. At first, it was assumed they had simply fallen behind, struggling through rough seas. But when the convoy arrived in Liverpool on March 31st, no trace of the missing 4 was ever found. No wreckage, no radio calls, no enemy contact. They had vanished without a word, as if erased mid-voyage. The Admiralty's initial reaction was disbelief. The U-boat threat had been almost neutralized. Mines were few in that sector. Meteorological reports showed improving weather, yet by every navigational log, those ships had disappeared in an area only 300 miles wide, one of the most heavily patrolled stretches of the Atlantic. When naval investigators examined radio logs from other convoys, they found something even more curious. A faint distress signal intercepted by HMS Goodson around 23:40 hours on March 23rd. The call sign matched Fort York. The message read, "Taking water amidships, lights out," and then abruptly cut off. No coordinates, no follow-up, no further transmissions from any of the missing ships. At the same time, American coastal monitoring stations recorded strange interference patterns across multiple frequencies. An oscillating burst, lasting several minutes, originating near 48° north, 34° west, precisely where HX358 had been sailing. The pattern was unlike standard radio jamming. It was logged and classified as unexplained atmospheric disturbance. For years, it sat buried in Admiralty File ADM 253122, forgotten among routine war records. The mystery deepened when post-war German archives were examined. Donitz's U-boat command diary for March 1945 shows no submarines operating in that quadrant. U-530 and U-977 were still refitting in Bergen. The few remaining operational boats were deployed to intercept Arctic convoys, not Atlantic ones. In short, there was no enemy in position to strike HX358. So what had taken the 4 ships? One hypothesis was structural failure. Many wartime-built merchantmen rushed through shipyards under the Liberty program, suffered from brittle steel in cold water. It's possible that the pounding storm caused catastrophic hull fractures. Yet even if one ship broke apart, 4 vanishing simultaneously, without trace, defied coincidence. Another theory points to secret cargo. In early 1945, the Allies were transporting sensitive materials under sealed orders, radar components, decrypted Enigma equipment, even captured German technology. Some researchers suspect at least one ship in HX358 carried experimental munitions, possibly involving unstable explosive compounds. An accidental detonation in the storm could have destroyed multiple vessels in seconds, leaving little debris. Official records, however, remain silent. Captain Baker Creswell's final report was terse but ominous. 4 merchant vessels missing, no torpedo reports, no signals post 2300 hours. Search unsuccessful. Conclude loss by unknown cause. After the war, the Admiralty quietly reassigned HX358's file to a restricted archive under Anomalous Convoy Losses, 1941-45. For decades, it went unmentioned until 1987, when naval historian Dr. Margaret Cole uncovered fragments of its communications logs while researching post-war convoy data. She noted eerie similarities to earlier mysterious disappearances. Identical weather, similar positions, and the same lack of enemy contact. Cole called it the Atlantic pattern, a term now used by maritime historians studying wartime vanishing cases. In 2001, an underwater survey by the British Geological Society found a deep-sea depression along HX 358's route, a collapse zone nearly 30 kilometers wide. Theorists speculate the missing ships may lie there, buried under silt and tectonic debris, unreachable by current submersibles. Yet, the lack of wreckage, even drifting lifeboats, remains a chilling gap in the evidence. To the men who survived HX 358's storm, the memory lingered. Lieutenant Roger Dempsey of HMS Hesperus later said, "We thought the war was over, that the Atlantic had finally been tamed. But that night, the sea reminded us it still chose who lived and who didn't." By the war's end, in May 1945, the Admiralty ceased investigating. The records closed with a single sentence: losses presumed due to weather. But among sailors and officers alike, a whisper persisted that in the final weeks of the war, the Atlantic claimed one last secret for itself: 4 ships, nearly 200 men, and a gap in the convoy list that no one could fully explain. It was the end of the Battle of the Atlantic, but not the end of its mysteries, for in the years that followed, veterans spoke quietly of messages from convoys that never arrived, coded signals that appeared in logs days after they were sent, and ships recorded as departed, but never sighted again. Those haunting accounts set the stage for the final enigma of the Atlantic War, the Phantom Convoys of 1945, vessels that left no trace at all, not even in history. May 1945. The guns of Europe fell silent, and the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest continuous campaign of the Second World War, finally drew to a close. German U-boats were surrendering in their ports, their proud wolf packs reduced to wrecks rusting in Norwegian fjords. The convoys that once braved fire and storm now sailed under bright, peaceful skies. But in the aftermath of victory, naval recorders began to notice something strange. Convoys that had sailed but never arrived, ships listed as departed, but never confirmed at any port. These became known among sailors as the ghost convoys of the Atlantic War. It began with paperwork, not stories. In the first months after VE Day, Allied shipping officers cross-checked their convoy logs to reconcile wartime records. Out of more than 3,000 documented convoy operations, 5 small convoys showed unresolved losses. Ships unaccounted for, no survivors, no enemy claims, and, most curious of all, no confirmed sightings past their departure points. At first, it was assumed to be clerical error, but closer scrutiny revealed otherwise. One such case involved Convoy on 239, a westbound formation that departed Liverpool on April 25, 1945, bound for New York. It consisted of 28 merchantmen and 4 escorts, including HMS Riu and HMCS Long Branch. The convoy's progress reports were steady until April 30, when radio silence fell. 3 days later, the escorts arrived in Halifax with 22 ships. 6 had disappeared. No radio logs, no U-boat reports, no Mayday calls. The surviving captains swore they last saw the missing vessels during calm weather, in daylight, less than 200 miles from the Irish Shelf. Naval intelligence quickly classified the case under post-hostility review, fearing rumours might undermine public morale as the war ended. Officially, ON 239 completed its mission. Unofficially, it didn't. Another anomaly surfaced in US Navy files. Convoy CU-71, a tanker group sailing from New York to the UK in March 1945. The voyage was recorded as uneventful, except that 2 tankers, Ruth Kellogg and Empire Trident, failed to appear at the refueling point at Loch Ewe. The weather had been fair, the seas mild. No flotsam, no reports of enemy contact. Their loss was noted only as presumed foundered. Decades later, oceanographic mapping found no wreckage on their plotted route. The deeper researchers looked, the more inconsistencies they found. Convoy rosters and naval communications didn't always align. Departure dates were missing, arrival tallies didn't match, and in several instances, entire message sequences were redacted from archived records. The war had ended in victory, but the Atlantic still kept its secrets. Historians and naval officers alike have offered theories. Some point to the confusion of those final chaotic weeks, where orders changed daily, ships rerouted or renamed, and clerical errors proliferated. Others suggest the sea simply swallowed them. Wrecks that sank silently from mechanical failure, their loss unnoticed in the flood of post-war reports. But a few, pouring through Admiralty intelligence files, believed there was something more deliberate. 45. The Allies began moving vast quantities of captured German technology, gold, and scientific materials across the Atlantic under utmost secrecy. Some of these operations, known later as Operation Safe Haven and Operation Paperclip, used disguised or unlogged convoys. If any of these transport missions met with disaster, storms, mines, or human error, the details may have been buried to protect classified objectives. The ghost convoys, some argue, could have been these missions, erased from history by bureaucratic design. Still, not all evidence fits that explanation. Among sailors and surviving escort officers, the sea's reputation carried its own mythos. They spoke of the silent zones, areas where compasses spun and radio contact failed, where ships seemed to lose sense of direction under the aurora-lit skies. Many dismissed it as magnetism from the mid-Atlantic ridge or the quirks of wartime radio frequencies. But to the men who served, it was something else, the sea's way of reclaiming what it was owed. A haunting entry in a Royal Navy post-war training manual reads, "The Atlantic is not conquered. It tolerates our presence only until it chooses otherwise." In the decades that followed, divers and researchers searched for answers. In 1967, a joint Anglo-Canadian expedition located scattered wrecks believed to be part of ON 239, but identification proved impossible. The hulls bore no visible damage, no torpedo holes, no fire. One ship lay upright on the seabed, hatches closed, lifeboats still in place. It looked, one diver said, as if the crew had simply walked away. Today, the records of these missing convoys remain fragmentary. Some logs have been lost, others sealed under National Archive restrictions. Maritime historians continue to compile the fragments, a handful of signals, an intercepted SOS, or a final navigation fix, to piece together what happened in those last, chaotic weeks of the war. The Battle of the Atlantic ended with Allied victory, but also with enduring silence. A silence that stretches across the ocean floor, where thousands of ships and sailors rest, unmarked and unseen. For every convoy that returned home, another disappeared into fog and memory. Even now, sonar crews mapping the seabed sometimes stumble upon unknown hulls, unlisted, unrecorded, lying at impossible depths. Each discovery reopens the same question that haunted wartime commanders and historians alike. How can a convoy, an entire formation of ships, simply vanish? The Atlantic gives no answer. And perhaps that is why these stories endure. Not just as tales of war, but as reminders that even in an age of total warfare and technology, some truths remain beyond human reach. The 5 mysterious convoy tragedies of the Atlantic War remind us of courage, loss, and the unfathomable power of the sea itself. A power that, even in peace, keeps its secrets locked beneath the waves.